Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate you still taking the time at such a late hour. Actually, in one of what seems to be a bit perversion of German academia, I'm still trying to get my PhD in entrepreneurship business research. And one of the things that also Peter from Prezi mentioned is that in entrepreneurship, we use a theory called self-efficacy, which basically means, you should think about yourself. Am I be able to pull this off? And if I have a high level of that, I'm very likely to start a company. So that's very interesting for us as a research subject. Why do people become entrepreneurs? Are you born as an entrepreneur, or is that something that you can learn? And I think all of the speeches have been amazing so far. And this is very important for self-efficacy, that you see those idols, those shining knights in white armor who do amazing stuff, and you say, wow, I want to be like that. That is what research shows us. But it also shows us that if you see somebody who is not very inspiring, who is not very impressive, and he has had some kind of success, you're going to be like, wow, if this idiot can do it, then I can do it as well. So basically, if I succeed, after this talk, and you think, who's this clown? What do you want to tell us? Then I think I've achieved my mission, because that should motivate you guys basically to also try it, because really it's not that hard. So let me start with something. If somebody played a drinking game, I think every time Silicon Valley has been mentioned today, they would have been definitely passed out by now. I want to start with a little quote, because we are based in Berlin. Like the past 7 years, I've been doing venture capital investments and company building in Berlin. And Berlin is in this heightened situation of, self-celebration right now, because everybody goes like, wow, Berlin, it's so cool, the rents are cheap, everybody's a punk, everybody's working on a creative project, it's going to be the next Silicon Valley. So just a couple of weeks back, the managing director of Microsoft Germany, alongside Steve Ballmer, the developers guy, they came to Berlin and said, we opened up an accelerator, and says, Berlin will become the Silicon Valley of Europe. Awesome. Just as a short reminder, this is the same guys that said about the iPhone, it's the most expensive phone in the world, it doesn't appeal to business customers. Basically just days after the iPhone came out, they said it's not going to work. Maybe a slight misjudgment there. And I also think that Berlin is not going to be the next Silicon Valley. And I'm going to speak some about that and what we think is special about Europe and how we should adjust, what all the guys with a lot of experience from the United States tell us about what is successful for them, and we have a bit of a unique view on that. So first of all, how is Europe different from the United States? And I mean, I don't want to dive into deep cultural discussions, but really focus on some of the points that are interesting for us as investors in companies. So venture capital, which is basically the guys you might approach at some point because they should invest some money into your business, which probably at that stage still is very, very risky. They bet, at least in the traditional definition, they bet on positive outliers. So they bet on the Facebooks and the Twitters and the Googles, that one thing where you invested $100,000 when they were still in the garage and went on to sell for billions and billions, and they're going to make you earn some really money. The question, I'm going to challenge that for the European sphere. I think the venture model actually should work different here. So that's the first question. The second question is there a developed angel ecosystem? So if you start a company and you go to the United States, there's lots of institutions and people around who can help you with some money, but also with a lot of expertise. And my theory would be that compared to that, if we look at Europe and Germany specifically, we are actually much less developed here. And the third part is, what are realistic exit scenarios? So we all just seen the Twitter IPO happening. Is that actually a realistic exit scenario for all of us in the room? I mean, I think it's a great goal to have, but more realistically, if you look at data, what is happening in Europe, and by Europe, I apologize, I'm not an expert for the Baltics, to be frank, but I focus a lot on, obviously, on Germany, which is our home market. Data shows that the most likely exits that you're going to have is more in the 10 to 50, maybe to 100 million range, which wouldn't be very impressive to the American guys, but I think we are here in Europe, we should focus on what is possible here, and that is probably a segment that is very relevant for us. First of all, before I'm going to deep dive into how we adapt to the local changes here, and also put out a bit of recommendations to, if you decide to stay here and do something in Europe, focus in Europe, how could you actually, how should you do that? And how do we try to position ourselves? So that's me with my 4 partners in clearly showing the full creativity of shirt colors that you can bring to the table, an extremely creative crowd. Today we run a fund called Project A Ventures, which is a venture capital fund. We invest out of a fund of roughly $100 million over a period of 5 years. So we'll roughly invest 20 million every year in companies mainly in the online space, B2B and B2C. I think in the talk before, there was a very clear statement, do more B2B, and I think that's spot on. I mean, if I could recommend you anything, do that. It definitely is the better, wiser battle to choose, so exactly spot on. I did a couple of companies here. I'm going to speak to one which is Tyrendo, which is going to be one of the examples where I think could be a typical solid execution case in a European startup. Saatchi Online is another example where I'm currently a board member. It's the largest marketplace in the world for emerging art. So that's a pretty cool project I'm always proud to speak about. It's a marketplace where artists from all over the world upload images of their art. Typically, they are just before they get gallery representation, or maybe they have a gallery agent, and their artwork ranges between $500 to $20,000 or euros. And what's happening is that Saatchi Online has built a huge marketplace where collectors from all over the world come, they look for art, and then they buy it. And what's really cool is that if you're an artist in Berlin now, you have an agent or a gallery in Berlin, people from Berlin will come there, will come there and buy it locally, basically. But what happens over the website is that people from all over the world buy it, actually, and that's quite cool, because this company has shipped to 80 countries this year, 80 countries, so it's quite big. And for example, now we see a huge surge in demand for art from Syria, because people look for a way to support the people there. So that has been a quite cool company. Yeah? So this is what I've been doing for 2 years now, together with the 3 other guys up there. Before that, as Andrius mentioned, I was working for Rocket Internet, and actually since its very beginning in 2007. And I don't know if all of you or some of you know what Rocket Internet is. It started basically in 2007 as more of a think tank, so rather a small team really thinking about, we want to build new projects. There were like 3 brothers, very famous and successful German internet entrepreneurs as the masterminds behind that. And their idea was, if we invest and we centralize some of the resources, maybe because there's not so many business angels, just as one example, in Germany as there are in the United States. So it's very helpful for young entrepreneurs to get experience and expertise and advice and even executional power through some institution. Why don't we do that? Why don't we create a small team, mostly tech guys, because for all the business entrepreneurs, it's always very hard to find a team of engineers willing to do something for them. As well as some marketing people. Also there, it's getting more and more professionalized. 3-4 years back, you could basically do everything yourself. You could teach yourself how to put Google AdWords in, but this is getting much more complex. So that was the idea. We create a couple of companies, and then we support them operationally. So what happened, so for example, this is eDarling. So basically one of my first projects, I was selling love to the German people and the European people. eDarling is a company which was modeled after eHarmony, which is a company in the United States where basically through a very scientific test, you're going to answer a lot of questions. And there's basically a psychological model, it's called the Big 5 personality traits, that then you're going to get matched to other people who should be like a perfect match. So if you're a very dominant person, you're going to be matched with a very submissive person. I mean, just in just in broad terms. So basically, that is obviously a very scientific method. This guy was the guy who programmed the first algorithm, how to match people. And that company was fairly successful. So that was the first proof of the concept. Out of Rocket, we started a company in a market that was already pretty much penetrated. So online dating is one of the most professionalized spaces in European internet, because there's a lot of money to be made. If you sell love to people, they're willing to pay a high price, actually, as we found out, 200, 300 euros per year, which is quite a lot. Which means the market is very, very much professionalized. And we, through that providing the team with a lot of operational backup, marketing, engineering, business intelligence, customer relationship management, the company actually became very successful. So we did the next thing, which is Zalando. I don't know if you guys know Zalando, but now it's probably Europe's second largest e-commerce for fashion and shoes, second only to ASOS. So that started small as well, but it developed very nicely. And this year they're trying to do, it's 5 years old now, and this year they're trying to do 2 billion net sales, which is quite a lot. So in 5 years they grew to, I don't know, 5,000–6,000 people probably. So it's a pretty big operation. And both those companies were very important steps for Rocket, obviously in its development. And the third part then is Groupon. And that would happen in the beginning of 2010. I think Groupon was mentioned earlier. We saw the Groupon model coming up, and what we did, we recreated the Groupon model. So we did exactly the same. So we were basically cloning a business where, for what probably a lot of people in the States really hated us, also in Germany. So we were subject, I think, to a lot of unhappiness there. We started in Germany and quickly expanded to all over Europe and merged the company with Groupon roughly 3 to 4 months after its inception, after our inception. And in that M&A deal, Rocket and Groupon were basically, and City deal, which was the Rocket's Groupon, were responsible for the global rollout, basically. And that led to a situation where 5 years after we had started Rocket, it now was in a situation that had basically an infrastructure all around the world. It could execute all kinds of business models in a global structure. So by then, the focus had also shifted to emerging markets, because through Groupon, through Zalando, we had, for example, taken Zalando to Brazil also, because that's a very interesting market. And Dafici is, you know, also extremely successful in the mid hundreds of millions of revenue quite quickly in only a couple of years. We had ended up with a global infrastructure, but then we also decided to leave and do our own thing, basically. And what we do is what some people call Rocket Internet's slightly less ugly cousin. It's Project A Ventures, which first and foremost is like a company built with attached funds. So that's a $100 million fund that we invest out of. The anchor investor is the Otto Group. It's Germany's largest retailer. They come from big catalogs, basically. They were basically present in every household in Germany. And Axel Springer, which is one of Europe's largest media houses. They own Bild, which is probably the biggest newspaper in Germany and beyond. We are active in Sao Paulo and Berlin. And the whole idea is we invest like a venture capitalist. So contrary to what we did at Rocket, we want to find true entrepreneurial teams. It can be internal teams who we take in and who we brainstorm with and come up with new ideas, but it can also be external teams. So people like you who have a business idea and we talk about it. I had the pleasure of already speaking to 2 or 3 teams here in the audience, which was very insightful. Those could be perfect targets for us as well, and we would invest, just like any standard venture capitalist would. But what we also do, we have a team of 100 functional experts. Those guys are not consultants. Those guys are actually doing stuff in the following disciplines. We do a lot of marketing. So out of 120 people are probably marketing experts for different channels of marketing. There's a lot of product development, IT happening. But for example, there's also HR, recruiting, and international build-up for organizations. So those are things that we do for our companies, basically. This is not in a consultancy way, but if you start your company and you only have an idea, maybe you build the first prototype, maybe you haven't, the first customers that would like to buy if you actually had something, those are the guys who are going to build it together with you. And the idea is, in the beginning, you're going to be working with a lot of our people, but at the same time, from day one, we start building up your own team. So your team will grow, and ours will basically withdraw over time. So that after 6 to 9 months, you're basically independent, because we don't want to build a Project A satellite that doesn't work without us, but we actually want to work a very self-sustaining company. This is basically what we do. We've been doing this for a lot of companies, and we want to point out a couple of ones. We And the next example is going to be Tyrendo, basically. But coming back to this, what are our terms? So if it is internal teams, we start business from scratch, like we did in one example, which I'm going to outline in a moment. We would probably invest somewhere between 750K to 1.5 million, and we would end up with an equity stake of somewhere between 20–30%, something like that. And we also do external teams, which is basically we would be able to invest maybe a little bit more. Then there's two types. Either we are very highly involved, which means you have 10–15 people of our team working for you and executing your ideas, or it's rather more on the giving advice side, basically. What do we bring to the table? So what do we think is actually critical for successes? And in that, you already see one of the big assumptions, what we think is possible. So we are very much about solid execution. We are not great visionaries, so the next Facebook is probably not going to come to life in this mind. We are very much about solid execution, and we are very much about process innovation. That is also why I think, personally, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with executing an idea that somebody else also had before. So if you look at Zalando company, for example, which is hugely successful now, it copied the ideas of selling shoes online from Zappos. And then everybody was upset. Okay, so there already is a shoe shop. Why should there be a second one, blah, 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 blah. And what people forget, there's a specific reasons that there should be more than one company doing something, because that's a monopoly, and that's very bad for consumers. So it is very important that more people try the same thing. And there's also a specific reason why in Germany, at least, it's not possible to get intellectual property for an idea. Unless you develop something really specific, something with really research and development with actual, that actually is patentable. Only in business model, it can't be patented, and I think that's the right way. So we personally think it's a very, very viable approach, also for us in Europe, who are, as was said before, very much focused on process innovation rather than actual product or business model innovation. So I think it's totally fine for you guys to go after a business model which has already been there before and execute it better, find ways how to make it better. That's what Google did in the end. As we learned today, apparently it was the 8th search engine on the market, but it was done better. And what we bring to the table here is we have a strong history in e-commerce, so we try to give all our companies a common framework, which also scales a bit beyond Magento, which was also mentioned earlier. We have a lot of expertise in global marketing, so the marketing teams that have built companies like Groupon and Zalando and eDarling, they coincidentally also now work in parts with us, so they would be also at your disposal. We do a lot of business intelligence and analytics. That is one very important aspect for us always. Even for the smallest companies, we invested a lot of our own fund into creating a top-of-the-art, best-in-class BI solution, which we're basically going to give you for free if you start a company with us. So if we invest 300K into your company, we're going to give you a data warehouse worth $500,000 basically on top, because we think it's so important to scale quickly that you're actually going to know what's going on. And there's a bit of expertise around global execution, right? I mean, with Rocket, we went to so many countries. Already now, with Project A, half of our companies are in Berlin. The other half is somewhere else. In Brazil, in the United States, in Singapore, in the UK, basically everywhere. One example that I wanted to show you, which I think is a very specific thing that worked well for us in Europe. And this is a very much different startup that we have been talking about before. There is no great idea behind here. The idea is to sell car tires online. By the way, forget all the marketing talk. That's not what it's about. You don't have to be sold on how awesome this is. We have, blah, blah, blah. You can buy tires online for attractive prices. You get fast delivery and so on. But that's not what it's about. It was basically an idea that was already been there before. It's just a shop, so it's nothing specific. It's nothing spectacular. But we think in a lot of European startups, we see a lot of actual entrepreneurial success happening in Europe. And again, I apologize, this is not very visionary, this is not the Steve Jobs of the world, but this is just very solid execution, which we think is actually quite valuable. So what happened? As the very first project that we did, we looked at different markets and we thought one of the most sexy products we can think of, obviously car tires, right? We were looking at the market, a lot of players already in the market, but nobody really did it well. So the websites were crappy. You could see, this looked like I had built it 10 years ago with Microsoft Front Page. There has to be a better way, you know. So we tried to, bring this to a new market. With this guy is, I don't know if you know him, is Sebastian Vettel, German guy, 3 or 4 times Formula 1 world champion. He's going to be the testimonial, create a nice website, and do some heavy push on marketing. That basically was the whole idea of what we did. How did that go? Just to give you an example, what execution can do. So in the beginning of 2012, we launched Tyrendo in Germany, and quite quickly it became clear to us, if we want to be successful, one of the core strengths of European startups often is internationalization, going to international markets. If you're in the United States, you're sitting on a huge market, there's no real point in going to, you always concentrate on the US. It's most likely that you haven't reached your level of saturation yet. If you're in countries like that, it goes much quicker. And if you're based in a city like Berlin, it's very easy to internationalize to the whole continent quite quickly, by which, in fact, you actually almost are dealing with a market which is as attractive, at least the same region like the Americans. So that was very interesting for us. And you can do it all centralized from one location. You don't have to have an office somewhere for a model like that. It's just a website, you have to have local supply, and then you're good to go, right? A lot of stuff happened over TV advertising, so something to keep in mind. If you do something that is appealing for a broad audience, at some point, TV advertising might be interesting for you. If you have something that works very well, at least in Germany, the TV stations are likely to give you like a deal, media for equity. So actually this is not super expensive because people will take a share in your company in return. Now obviously that's a double-bladed sword, or it's a dangerous thing, so be very careful when you use that. But overall, that worked very well for us. And one interesting thing, I think, is here. We see this here. So contrary to, with what we learned before about MVPs and so on, we are also believers in very fast iterations. So we don't have great ideas, we're executors. So what happened is that in this 1 year, we basically did 4 major versions of the website. And every time it got a little bit better. Let's see this. And this is some data I want to share with you. And this is also outlining, again, how we made this company successful, because ultimately what happened is that after 18 months, so basically at the end of this period that you see here, we sold the company. So it was our first exit, and we sold it after 18 months for 50 million euros, so 50 million euros, which at the time, for the short period of time, I think was a great success. What you see here is, so the blue one is the amount of orders, right? There's those spikes because people buy tires for their cars when they need to change them. And in Germany, there's typically in October, when winter is coming and you need to change to winter, and in March, April, when summer is coming and you need to change your tires for the summer. But I think what's interesting here is to look at this line here. That is the conversion rate. So that is basically the rate at which we convert people who come to the website into buyers. So for us as e-commerce guys, this is extremely important because it's one metric that drives basically everything else. If you spend euros on marketing, so you pay €1 for every visitor who comes to your website, if you convert 1 out of 100 or 2 out of 100, it obviously changes the world. So that is one of the metrics that we really focus on. And I think the interesting part is what happened is if you go out of the seasons, right? But if you compare this box right before the season to this box right before the season, obviously, there's less orders in the season, but it's very interesting to see that the general level of conversion rate is a really different one, the same from here to here. So this is what is happening if I go back through all of this process, right? We go through many iterations. Every day we change something. So we are focusing on much more about the process, creating a process that allows you to iterate fast and to develop fast. We probably take 20 decisions every week, and 19 of them are wrong. But the important thing is to decide something quickly, and then execute, and then test and measure. So this is what we're doing a lot. And unfortunately, I would tell you, so this is the secret of success, and this is the one idea that we had, the genius idea. We understood how people buy tires online, but that didn't happen. What happens really is that we just improved day by day, and this is basically what's visualized here. And that is the whole magic behind that business model. Yeah. So what's the so what? In the beginning, I asked a couple of questions about the American market and how things are different. We think that here in Europe, and don't take me wrong, you know, I'd like you to walk out of here inspired by the amazing success that we've been demonstrated from the States. This is our view of the world, which is obviously only a tiny part of the world. I think it's perfectly legitimate to reach for the stars. But we would like to show you a segment that is, I think, most often overlooked, and that is really just more realistic. So, and by the way, when we walk around Berlin, Berlin is in a, as I mentioned, in a great phase right now. There's companies like SoundCloud that is doing amazingly well. There's a company called Sechs Wunderkinder that just attracted 30 million funding from Sequoia. So, and they are really great companies. But it leads to a situation where everybody thinks it's super hip to start a startup. So right now, everybody in Berlin is trying to do a startup. 4 years ago, there was no one, right? It was a different world. When we started in 2007 at Rocket, you weren't a cool kid when you were doing a rocket, you were just a nerd. It was still cool to go to consultancies and go banking, but startups, you know, you were probably like a geeky computer kid to do that. And now this has changed. Everybody's flocking to Berlin startups. Everybody wants to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. And if we openly communicate in an interview with the newspapers, so we think there's a sweet spot, 20, 30 million exit valuation, people say, wow, that's pretty small. And if we pause for a moment and think about that, so I'm telling you, by the way, if I tell my parents, so we built this car tire company, and within 18 months, we sold it for 50 million, and she's like, are you kidding me? You know, I mean, my parents they have been teachers all their life. They have no connection to this world whatsoever. So and they can even understand how much money that is. And I think if we now in Berlin speak to people and they say like, what? Why aren't you building the next billion-dollar companies? Or we speak to investors, they only go like, we invest only in 1 billion opportunities. There isn't that many. If you look at the data, there's probably been 5, 6 or so within the last 10 years in Germany. Yeah? So it's a pretty ambitious goal. And going for 20 million to 100 million US dollar exit, which is not betting on the outlier, which is not betting on the one company that's going to finance your whole fund, but it's betting on the good idea with a great team and the perfect execution, right? It's not the genius idea, it's the simple idea that you can execute very well. I think that's ambitious enough, yeah? I think also one important thing, overall exits and valuations are lower here. It's harder to raise capital. It's not easy in the States either, but it's harder here probably on a very good valuation. So get access to experience to help. You know, it could be business angels, could be early investors, could be anything, you know, but get access to help. It doesn't matter how you get access to that help. You know, I'm not telling you, by the way, project A, wow, it's amazing, you know, you come with us, done deal. Just find some way of accessing it, yeah? And, as I mentioned before, there's no shame in executing someone else's idea. I'd like to be a guy, you know, who goes like, oh, so in 10 years, everybody will have flying skateboards. So in 5 years, everybody should have. So today we should do that because that's right on the visionary path, and you know, we're going to shape the future. I sell love and tires. It's not exactly what the mankind, you know, is dreaming of, but it fulfills basic needs: love, shoes, and car tires. And there's absolutely no shame in executing someone else's idea. An idea itself is worth nothing. So yeah, I feel pretty bad because now we've been inspired all day by these amazing visionaries, and now I tell you, by the way, it's also fine to just create a next shoe shop online. But actually, that's reality. And if you want to discuss, you know, some of the basic some of the basic ideas, also happy to do that. By the way, just on a side note, we also do take investments that are a bit more risky. We also like to try out stuff. We do B2B. We invested in this art marketplace that nobody knew if it's going to fly. We just invested in some security tech company, so we also do that. But I just wanted to make a case for the traditional European sweet spot as well. Probably a bit different, but hopefully also helpful for you guys. If I can do anything for you, feel free to get in touch, drop me an email, or tweet me. I'm always happy to help in any way. And that's kind of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.